universities is boycottable. We're not asking international institutions only to boycott Israel. We're asking everyone to boycott Israel, individuals and institutions. But the boycott should target only institutions, not individuals. See what I mean? So we're calling on individuals and institutions to boycott only Israeli institutions, not Israeli individuals. That's the difference. Yes?
You say an academic represents himself. He's an independent researcher. But when an academic, an Israeli academic, would come here to give a conference invited by here, of course, he needs the permission of his own institution.
Of course.
So the distinction...
It's splitting hairs. I mean, of course he needs or she needs approval of his university. He might, to make it even more difficult, he might even come and defend the occupation and apartheid. Assuming there's no institutional link, the University of Ghent invites an Israeli political scientist and he comes to justify the war crimes in Gaza. Would we call for a boycott against him or not? In the BDS movement, we wouldn't. Even if he is here, but there's a caveat. In our guidelines, we say that if an Israeli academic, artist, cultural figure is defending war crimes, justifying racial violence, inciting racial violence, you would boycott him or her on common sense grounds, not on BDS grounds. There's a common sense boycott. So imagine if an American singer is singing, is invited to give a gig, event in Brussels. And before coming to Brussels, he makes a very anti-woman remark. Women have half brains. Something really nasty against women. I'm sure the feminist movement and progressives in this country would call for a boycott against that event, right? They don't need BDS guidelines. It's just common sense. So people can boycott an Israeli academic who is coming to make statements supporting war crimes, justifying racial violence, and so on. But not on BDS grounds, because those are institutional grounds. On common sense grounds. People organize and say, this is a racist academic. We do not want her to speak on our behalf. That's perfectly legitimate. I personally am not a free speech extremist. There are free speech extremists that say Nazis can, stand on campus and call for anything they want. I think there should be a limit, which is racial incitement to violence. Justifying war crimes and inciting to violence. Because that has a practical impact. It's no longer speech. It's speech that leads to racial violence. If somebody comes here and says, oh, those Moroccans in Brussels are, they're very dangerous, we should do something about them. And then he starts explaining why Moroccans are naturally subhumans. That's not free speech, because he is inciting to racial violence against the Moroccan community in Brussels. We should take action against that by at least boycotting the event. It's non-violent. It's a very civic way of protesting racist speech that justifies war crimes and racial violence. Yes, in the back. Sorry.
Similar, it's a technical question applying to the principles. We had a small film festival, art and film festival, which is called Eye on Palestine. Often there are films which are funded, for example, from Palestinians living in Israel, but they are funded partly by the Israeli government. And the film in itself is worth seeing.
Just to understand, the Palestinian filmmakers are citizens of Israel?
For example, Palestinian filmmakers, or even
Jewish Israeli filmmakers.
Sivan, let's say,
yes.
Who is making very...
He's a good friend, I know him.
And probably some of these films are funded by the Israeli government. So what should we do?
Okay.
Because in principle you should boycott it because it's funded by Israeli government.
No. We have a very clear guideline. If you look at the cultural boycott guidelines on pacb.org, cultural boycott guidelines, we have a clear distinction between production and screening. So, Israeli artists, as taxpayers, as citizens, are entitled to government funds. They pay taxes, they're entitled to funds from government. They're entitled to services. cultural, educational services, including funds from the Ministry of Culture and various foundations in Israel. That's their entitlement as citizens. So long as there are no political strings, no political conditions on their production, getting money from the state to produce the work does not make it boycottable, per se. Unless there's, as I said, political strings. So the foreign ministry pays you money. Let's say you're an Israeli filmmaker, and I'm the foreign ministry. I pay you money to produce a film, propaganda, to show how Israel is a wonderful democracy, and Palestinians are, subhumans. Then you are not doing an arts project. You're doing a propaganda project that I'm funding as a state. That would be boycottable because there's a political string. But assume you're an Israeli filmmaker who's producing your own film, and you apply for funds from a cultural foundation in Israel, the state, the Ministry of Culture, and the ministry does not interfere in your content, does not interfere in your work, and they give you $10,000 for the production. No questions asked, as your entitlement. It's a good project, and they're funding it without asking about the content. That does not make it boycottable. Where we call for a boycott is if you get money to show your film in Brussels or Ghent. If you get money to screen it internationally, then no matter what the content is, it's propaganda. It's being used by the state for propaganda purposes. If it gets funding from the state or the lobby groups or the institutions that are complicit in Israel for screening internationally, it becomes boycottable. There's another issue. Yitzhak Laor, a famous Jewish Israeli writer, exposed in Haaretz in 2008 that there's a contract that Israeli artists, academics, writers, filmmakers have to sign to get funding from the Israeli Foreign Ministry to go internationally, to go to festivals and conferences. The contract has two very interesting clauses. It says, I'm paraphrasing, as a service provider, the Israeli person, academic, artist, whatever, takes it upon himself, promises basically, to show Israel's prettier face, to show the best side of Israel, and not to undermine the policies of the state of Israel. Those are the two conditions. So to get money from the foreign ministry, they turn you into a cultural ambassador of Israel. So we no longer treat you as an artist. Then the boycott applies. You're no longer an individual artist, an individual academic. You're a propaganda agent of the state, and we call for a boycott against you and your work. That's the only exception to the individual versus institutional boycott. And Israel does that. Israel has the largest per capita, the largest propaganda machine on earth per capita. No other country spends as much money on propaganda. Not even the United States, by the way. I mean, Israel is the world leader in propaganda. And they use academics, they use artists for propaganda purposes. The foreign ministry is very generous in Israel, especially after massacres. In Lebanon, Gaza, after any massacre, they send the ballerinas and the Beethoven musicians, and, to paint Israel's prettier face. That's part of what they call Brand Israel campaign, which was launched in 2005-06. Sorry, there was one person here and then in the back. Sorry, the person behind you and then you.
I have a small question.
Yes.
I always want to know the point of view of the other side. And you said that Netanyahu and the president, they say the BDS campaign is a strategic threat to Israel. But what did the Israeli universities say about this boycott? How do they view it? What do they say about it?
Again, you're assuming this dichotomy between the universities and the state. It's not. It's the state. Netanyahu said, the universities said. It's the same. There's no difference today, especially today. The heads of Israeli universities are very much part of this system. They're all recruited by government to fight BDS openly. This is not like a secret. They have open meetings with government. How can we work together to undermine BDS? That's what they say. I mean, openly in the Israeli media, they openly say that. What can we do together to fight BDS? So sometimes they say, let's call for a partial boycott to undermine BDS, because BDS calls for a full isolation of Israel. So let's call for a boycott of settlements, for example. Of course, the state does not accept that. The Israeli government is against all boycotts. But some liberal, quote-unquote liberal Zionist academics and artists say we should endorse a boycott of settlements just simply, pragmatically, to undermine BDS. So move everyone's attention to settlements and forget Israel as the big elephant in the room. But there's no difference between they're part of the fight against BDS. They view it as extremely dangerous. The head of the Israeli Presidents of Universities Committee that is fighting BDS said about the American Anthropological Association endorsement of BDS that he is very, very concerned about a domino effect. He already is noticing a domino effect. 2 years ago, it was the American Studies Association, 3,000 members, and before then, the Asian American Studies Association, even smaller, ethnic studies, women's studies, all kinds of associations, but nothing as big as the American Anthropological Association. Now there were the Modern Language Association, which is enormous, 35,000 members, might endorse BDS next year. That would be a tipping point for the academic boycott campaign. So Israeli presidents of universities are fighting BDS daily, very consciously, and they're completely in bed with government in fighting BDS. Yes, you and then yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, my original question has already been answered, but I have a question about the academic boycott. So we have heard examples here of this university being complicit in all kinds of research projects which are unsavory. And the question then is, what do we do? How do we force our universities to change their tune? And one idea which seems to be kind of second-order boycott is that we should start boycotting our own universities as well. And the same, I guess, is true for economic boycott. Namely, we have to convince companies not to trade with Israel, but they do trade. Should we then boycott them? That seems to be the logical outcome. So perhaps that might be even the stronger part of the boycott, not just calling a boycott of Israeli academic institutions or Israeli companies, but also our own companies and our own institutions which are involved with them if they don't change their tune.
Okay, for BDS has been effective because it's very strategic. We don't spread ourselves too thin. We're not very emotional. We're very cold, rational. We really shut down our emotions when we decide on a boycott campaign. There are 3 criteria that we advise internationally to target, to select a BDS target. First, the level of complicity. The more complicit an institution or a company is, the easier it is to mobilize public pressure against it. So a company like G4S, the security company, it's involved in Israeli prisons and Israeli checkpoints. Then one of the nastiest, the most complicit companies on earth in Israel's system of oppression makes a great target, especially because, and this brings us to the second point, so the level of complicity. The second point is the cross-movement solidarity. Does targeting this institution or this company help me build bridges between Palestine solidarity and progressive movements in this country? As I said, we have to remember that for the average Belgian, who gives a damn about Palestine solidarity? The average Belgian. That's not on their agenda. So I have to bring it to them. Well, you give a damn about your tax money going to the securitization, the militarization of your society. So let's work together against the profiteers of terrorism, the profiteers of the war industry. The 1% that profits from all this hurts you and hurts me. So let's work together. So cross-movement solidarity is very important. If you select a target that only hurts Palestinians, it will not go mainstream. You will not be able to get Belgian mainstream to support you against that target. The third criterion, which is very important, especially in an academic institution, because sometimes academics can be dreamy, not very strategic, which is the potential for success. It's an obvious criterion, but it's forgotten by many good activists sometimes. The potential for success. We cannot launch a boycott campaign unless we know, we've studied it, and we know that there's a reasonable chance of success. Let me give a concrete example to make things clearer. Intel, the chip manufacturer, Intel. Intel is deeply complicit in Israeli violations of international law. Many, many reasons. Intel is a monopoly, so many people around the world hate it, so it's good for bridging struggles. But there's almost zero chance of success against it today. In 2015, Every mobile phone, every PC, every laptop has an Intel chip in it. Until China, India, or somebody else, takes away the monopoly from Intel, we do not have the luxury of boycotting Intel. It'll be a waste of energy. And as human rights activists, we're effective. We're not stupid. We don't waste time. We cannot waste time. I'm personally a volunteer in the BDS movement. My time is extremely precious. I would never waste it on a campaign where we don't have a good chance of success. I'll put my energy in a campaign that has chance of success. That's how we became effective in 10 years. So, going back to the specifics of your question, I wouldn't call for a boycott if I'm a Belgian academic. What does it mean to boycott a Belgian academic institution? You cannot operationalize that. You cannot make it concrete. But your second point makes a lot of sense. If I don't have Israeli products to boycott in the supermarket, let's say a mainstream campaign, there isn't much Israeli being sold. There is, but assuming there isn't, targeting other companies that are involved in Israel's violations, whether they're Belgian companies, American companies, Saudi companies, whatever companies, of course, that's what we do in BDS. One example is Veolia. Veolia, the French company, is our biggest success in BDS. Just weeks ago, they withdrew entirely from the Israeli market, completely, after losing $26 billion worth of contracts in Sweden, the UK, Ireland, the US, Kuwait. So that's a very good example of a company, French company, but deeply involved in human rights violations in Palestine. And why did Veolia succeed in particular? Because think of everything else Veolia does. Privatizing water, privatizing sewage treatment, privatizing transportation, privatizing. And people hate that. People like their buses to be run by their city councils, by the government, by the public sector, not by a goddamn private company that wants to suck our blood. So people hate private public transportation companies, especially water companies and sewage companies. Who wants that privatized? Especially that they're so incompetent anyway. I mean, it's not like they're doing a great job. They're so incompetent, expensive, horrible. But just, I don't know who gets commissions out of their contracts. So targeting them was very popular with city council activists around the world, especially in the West. Everyone joined the Veolia campaign, and they lost one contract after another. That was a very, very strategic campaign. G4S is an excellent target. It connects struggles with the black movement in the United States, the Latinos in the United States, because it's involved in the Arizona wall with Mexico. It's involved in private prison industry in the US. It's a huge industry in the US, private prisons. G4S is very deeply involved, where people of color are the ones who are imprisoned. So it's connecting BDS with people of color struggles in the US. Racial justice, economic justice, social justice. Those are the best targets. So, and it's important to remember that we don't believe in lists. Long lists never lead to action, not strategic action. Because if you have a long list of companies that are complicit, and it's quite long, the list, I mean, endless. Almost all companies are complicit one way or another in Israel's violations. Very few people will join you. Because here goes your cereal, your shampoo, your clothing, your life goes away. So who's going to join that? The 5 extreme leftists who fully support. It's not effective. So we've got to be very strategic. So pick one target, and so in the University of Ghent, for example, let's say there are 3 projects with the Hebrew University, 1 with Technion, 2 with Tel Aviv, and so on. Okay, it's important to expose everything, but if you want to channel your energy, I would pick one that is military research. That's the top priority. It's military research. With a country like Israel now, that would be the top priority. Who can argue that Israel commits war crimes and crimes against humanity? So any military research with Israel is by definition immoral, illegal, and has to be stopped immediately. That would be a top project, rather than one on, let's say, social behavior of ants. I'm just kidding, but I mean, you get my drift. So let's think strategically when we pick target. Yeah.
Yes, I have a clarificatory question.
If you can raise your voice, please.
So I have a clarificatory question. So you said a few times that if conditions A, B, and C apply, then this event or this company is boycottable. And I wonder what boycottable means. So does it mean you have an obligation really to boycott this, or does it mean, well, there are reasons to boycott, but maybe other reasons apply not to boycott. So I imagine, for example, a very extreme case of an academic conference in Israel at an Israeli institution. But this conference is about justice and equality in political philosophy, for example. So then we, at the one hand, we might have a reason to boycott, but on the other hand, might be good reasons to develop that, research in Israel. So that's, what do you mean with boycottable?
Okay. Even in that case, I'll even go further. Imagine Hebrew University organizes a conference on BDS. Forget social justice. On BDS, on boycotting Israel. Actually, I'm not making this up. I was just invited to one. Last week, I received an invitation by Hebrew University, Truman Institute. I'm saying it on record. Truman Institute invited me to a conference on BDS. It's still boycottable, even though it's on BDS. Why is that? Are we stupid? No, we're not. As I said, we're strategic. In that case, we measure gains and losses, profits and losses, right? I mean, we have to be pragmatic. On principle, it's boycottable, but we've got to take that point into consideration. But it's about BDS. It will help us, right? Help us exactly in what? Reaching the 200, 300, 1,000 people in the room? Okay, so you reach them. 99% are racist anyway. It will not move them. They will attack you as anti-Semitic and blah, blah, blah. Total waste of time. So you convince 10 out of the 1,000. Isn't that good enough? No, it's not good enough. Because the overall picture, the Israeli propaganda machine, which Hebrew University is part of, will present your participation as legitimization of the university, as whitewash, as a cover-up. So they use me as a fig leaf. Why else would Hebrew University invite me to speak there? They know me quite well. They know exactly what I have to say. Why do they need me there? As a cover. See, a Palestinian human rights activist who's a co-founder of the BDS movement agreed to speak at Hebrew University. Why are you, a Belgian academic from Ghent, more Catholic than the Pope? Why are you more Palestinian than the Palestinians? If they are coming here and speaking, you should too. Don't boycott us. So no matter what you say, the overall result is loss, much more than profit. So of course, it is boycottable. Sorry, and then I'll come back to you. Yes.
Just in that, it's a strategic thing to invite you, because now they can, if you go, they say what you said, but if you don't go, they say, he can come and defend it, he can come to speak here about it, and he refuses. So he has nothing to say. They will say.
I mean, I say what I say in the New York Times and CNN and Bloomberg, and I don't need the Hebrew University to give me a platform to speak.
I was just thinking, because sometimes we invite for, and mostly it's the Jewish organizations who won't come, and we say, why don't they come? Let them defend themselves. They don't boycott us.
But that's different.
It's a way of not...
That's different. That's real cowardice, because they're being cowardly. Zionist organizations do not like to debate. But in that case, my presence would support an illegal system. I would cover it up. But if Ghent University had a debate and invited me to speak against a Zionist speaker, of course I would come. We like debates. They don't like debates, because they cannot face us. I mean, it's very difficult to make a case against BDS. Think about it. Oh, we don't want equal rights. I had a debate with the leader of the Zionist community in Berlin in 2012, I think it was. And I pushed him and pushed him and pushed him until he said, no, we cannot accept equal rights in Israel. Israel is different. Thank you, I rest my case. I don't need to add anything else. So in front of that aristocracy at the Berlin club, they got it. Ultimately, the guy does not want equal rights. He thinks Palestinians do not deserve equal rights. So that's why they avoid debates. How can you argue against BDS? Anti-Semitism, we can refute that in 3.5 minutes. Really, that's how long it will take me to refute the anti-Semitism charge. It's so silly, so ridiculous, that it's so easy to refute. The number of Jewish activists in BDS, the Jewish philosophers and writers and filmmakers that have joined BDS, and of course that we are absolutely opposed to anti-Semitism from the start. There isn't an iota of proof that we've ever, in any language, said or endorsed any anti-Semitic statement. They cannot prove it. So they can talk, but in a debate, we can challenge them. That's why they avoid debates. Yes?
You mentioned that the aims of the BDS campaign are to end the occupation.
If you can speak up, please.
You mentioned that the aims of the BDS campaign are to end the occupation, end apartheid, and implement the right of return. These things are not likely to happen overnight, right?
Right.
There's likely to be a very long, slow, messy process, eventually involving lots of unsatisfactory compromises, and the aims, as you envisage them, may never be fully achieved, right? My question is, would the BDS campaign be brought to an end as soon as the Israeli government agrees to engage in a meaningful, good faith peace process? Would you gradually scale back the boycott and the sanctions and so on as progress is made? Or would you keep it up, right, and keep up the pressure unless and until the aims that you've set out have been fully achieved in the way in which you envisage them and articulate them?
Sure. First, let me discuss your premise. You started with a premise that this is quite unrealistic. The 3 demands are quite unrealistic. It might take a very long time. And therefore, if anything takes a very long time, with time, you kind of reach compromises because you might get half measures. You might not get everything you aim at from the start. There's no reason to believe that we cannot achieve the 3 rights in 2015. I mean, if you asked me 5 years ago, I could have said it's a very difficult battle, it'll take a very, very long time. Not today. Not today. We're much more optimistic today. Much more optimistic today. We've made enormous progress in the last 2 years. Enormous. Really. I mean, we reached tipping point after tipping point in the last couple of years. And Israel is saying that. Hillary Clinton is saying that. You know, the mainstream establishment in Israel and the United States treat us as a strategic threat. So they know what they're talking about. And they're allocating a lot of money to fight us. And legal warfare. And the top lawyers. I mean, Israel is allocating enormous resources to fight BDS. So clearly they take it extremely seriously. That tells us we're onto something. That we're very effective. Our recipe is working. So there's no reason to doubt whether we can achieve our 3 rights or not. But even assuming the premise is correct, assuming that it is still dreamy and it will take forever. In South Africa, again, I was an anti-apartheid activist at Columbia University where I went to school. I remember, and I've said this story before in other talks, I remember once I was holding a sign, abolish apartheid. That's the sign, that's the statement we used to make at a demonstration on campus at Columbia University. And a fellow engineering student, I was an engineering student, no one is perfect. A fellow engineering student came up to me and he said, "Why are you wasting your time? I mean, doing this demonstration, you're Palestinian, don't you have enough to worry about? You're demonstrating with South Africans." I said, "Yeah, but it's connected. It's connected. As a human being, it's connected. To me, injustice in South Africa affects me." So he said, "But do you expect to abolish apartheid, this haughty, big signal, sign that you're holding, do you expect that to happen in your lifetime?" I said, "No, I really don't." I was very pessimistic then. But I'm doing it out of a moral commitment. So I did not expect it to happen, but I'm doing it out of a moral commitment. But it did happen in my lifetime, a few years after that incident. And nothing can take that away from me. I saw the collapse of apartheid that I played a tiny, tiny, tiny little part in my lifetime. There is no reason to believe why Israeli apartheid cannot collapse. The Soviet Union collapsed. Major powers around the world that were thought of as invincible collapsed. There's no reason to think why Israel cannot. The system, or the regime of oppression cannot collapse. There's no reason for that. The civil rights movement in the United States, when they first raised the slogan, "End segregation," it was dreamy, absolutely dreamy. Generation after generation of Americans lived with slavery, with segregation. It's impossible to change that. It wasn't impossible. Clearly it did change. With a lot of resistance from inside and pressure and so on, it happened. So we are more optimistic now, but the answer is absolutely not. We would not stop until our basic rights are met. Those are the minimal rights under international law. We're not asking for the maximum. This is the minimal form of relative justice, not absolute justice, relative justice. So we cannot compromise on that. Anyone else that has not asked? Yes, in the back and then in the front. Yes. Yes, go ahead, sir.
It has not directly related to BDS, but you said we oppose incitement to hate and violence, but there is also the international recognized right to armed resistance against occupation and oppression.
Yes.
So where would you draw the line?
Okay, that's different. The United Nations recognizes the right of a people under occupation to fight, to resist foreign occupation by all means, including armed resistance. International law allows that. But international law also says it has to target combatants or the infrastructure of occupation. You cannot target non-combatants. That's what international law says. So as a human rights movement, we've got to be very consistent. You cannot take international law piecemeal, cherry pick. I like this part, I hate this part. It's a system. International law is not the most just law on earth. We all know that. Who wrote international law? The victors in World War II, empires that wanted to expand their interests. We all know that. But for any oppressed community, be it in Palestine or anywhere else, it's international law or the law of the jungle. There's no third choice. There's no third choice. I mean, people who say, we don't like international law, and what's your alternative? The law of the jungle. The strongest takes it all. Clearly, that's immoral and not in the best interest of the oppressed, because we are the weaker party anyway. But international law, as you know, is very dynamic and very fluid. It's not set in stone. It evolves. So we base BDS on what we saw as principles in international law that can allow us to go much further. So yes, we always say BDS is not in opposition to any form of resistance. It's part of Palestinian popular resistance, and it's the most important form of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle today. Today, anyone in solidarity with Palestine who cannot support BDS is not really in solidarity with Palestine. He or she is in solidarity with themselves, or with Israel, possibly, protecting Israel from killing itself. Some activists say that, Zionists. Yeah, we don't like BDS, but we support Palestinian rights because we just want to end the occupation. Forget about the right of return. Forget about justice inside Israel, because we just want to end the occupation. Otherwise, you will destroy Israel. Less in Europe, but we hear that a lot in the United States, Canada, Australia, that BDS's slogans would destroy Israel. That's the term they use. So our answer is freedom, justice, and equality. If that would destroy Israel, what does that say about Israel?
I think we have time for one more question.
One more question. So.
Yes, okay. I have a question about a very tiny Jewish minority of scholars or any other human rights activists who stand up for Palestinians.
In Belgium, you mean? Or
No,
in
in Israel.
Okay.
So you mentioned it's really very tiny, but they do exist.
Yes.
So my feeling is that me, as an already an activist, I easily am convinced to sign a boycott, but I have difficulty convincing my colleagues who have much less knowledge about the reality of the